While I was reading through your website today, I stumbled across you talking about having had a spiritual breakthrough about 2 or 3 years into your business that really changed how you were doing business. But you never specified what that breakthrough was.
Yeah.
And I'm really curious what that was.
Thanks for asking. The reason why I don't specify it is because I don't want people to necessarily say, well, I should, look into George's spiritual path or something like that. I think that a spiritual breakthrough happens for each person in some of the most unique ways. Sometimes it's not even spiritual, or some people might not consider it spiritual, but it's very spiritual to them. And some people, it might seem, well, that's very strange. That's very a traditional spirituality, So I'll share with you what happened to me was that, I for a long time, I have been recovering from my religious past as a fundamentalist Christian. And a lot of people don't know that. Those watching now know. I was very into the Bible as the literal, word of God, and trying to convert everybody that I knew so that they would not go to hell, because it's only one way, and it's what this book says. And I, tried to convert one of my professors in college, and it backfired because he asked me certain questions that I couldn't answer, and it got me into this line of inquiry that basically made me lose my faith, that faith in that particular religion. So for a couple years after that, and I would say for long after that, I was afraid of either going to hell, or what does that mean? Like, where's my meaning now if that religion is no longer true?
Can I just interject for 1 second? So in this fundamentalist belief, there was really this is the truth.
This is the truth.
Everything else is not true. And if you don't believe into this truth, you're gonna go to hell.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Now, the thing is, I think what a lot of people don't realize about fundamentalist people is that there is for me, and I think this is true for a lot of my peers in that space, and a lot of people aren't willing to admit this as a fundamentalist, is you're always afraid that what you believe isn't really true, because you're supposed to be so certain about it to yourself and to everybody else, because the stakes are high. You go to hell if you don't, that it's so much, the stakes are so high for this certain belief that therefore, just like the Tao, there's always the opposite side. You are very afraid that it's not really true. So there's a rigidity, and therefore, if you bend a little bit, it breaks. So that's why for years I was a recovering, fundamentalist. Like, what do I believe now? Am I going to hell? So I think it was really that time in my 2 to 3 years into my business, around 2011, 2012, that I stumbled upon just a series of books that helped me to find meaning again. And like I said, what I'm going to say doesn't really matter. It's what I'm meaningful to me. And everybody needs to find their own path. And that's what I believe now. And that series of books includes books about the afterlife. It was there's a book called The Afterlife Experiments, which by Gary Schwartz. There was another book called The Afterlife Unveiled by Stafford Beatty. Anyway, these are not famous books, but they meant a lot to me, and it really helped me. And there was another book, a whole body of work called Spiritism, which came out of Brazil. It came out of France actually originally, and then it was very popular in Brazil. Allan Kardec. and Chico Xavier. Anyway, yes.
And with these books, like what did these books give you at that
Yeah.
time? And it
These
doesn't have to
books,
be generalizable. It's really
yeah,
about you for me.
yeah. These books gave me it's funny to say, but they gave me a different kind of certainty about the afterlife. And it was no longer I better believe this because my elders are telling me that this is true. But it was a belief that I had explored on my own and saw so much that I'm like, okay, I can't not believe this anymore. I no longer am afraid that this might not be true. It's a very flexible, like, hey, you could challenge me all you want, but I've seen enough different sides of it to see that this is this is true for me, very, very much true. So that certainty, the newfound kind of grounded certainty about the afterlife, gave me a different perspective about everything that I do, and the sense of security, which used to be in how, prestige, social status. It used to be in physical, financial security. That all got deepened into something much deeper than saying, even if I was not financially secure, even if I was not socially prestigious, I am still profoundly okay.
So
And
that
yeah,
certainty of you are okay. I imagine it's not just you are okay, but it's okay.
yes, yeah. I am okay now, and I will be even more okay, and all of us will be even more okay, in the long term, is the belief that I have now. And which means that I don't have to try so hard to make sure I'm okay, make sure my clients are okay, make sure everyone around me is okay.
Like when you say that, if I kind of compare that to what you expressed earlier as this rigidity, what I hear is a loosening, like a
Yes, yes, a full, but here's what's interesting about this. It's not that the fundamentalist religion had no benefits, because I think back then I needed that for that formation of my psyche back then, because I was an immigrant at an early age. Everything was very unstable. I was trying to form my identity, and that helped me form my identity. And that fundamentalist Christianity has a lot of benefits. When I meet someone who is a fundamentalist Christian, and my feeling about it is they really believe, like not because someone told them to believe, but they really believe because of their own explorations, I'm really happy for them. Because if they believe and it produces love, then I'm really happy. But if it produces fear, it produces anger, it produces judgment, then I'm wondering what will happen when that belief gets broken a little bit. So, because that fundamental, what I got from that fundamentalist religion that I still am so grateful for today, is this profound gratitude about God, and this gratefulness that we are taken care of by God. But that back then, I'm only taken care of if I believe this certain line of thinking from my elders. Now I'm taken care of truly, like no matter what. And still today, I pray kind of like I used to pray. Like the language still easily comes to me, thank you, God, which for some people would not, make sense. But so anyway, it's so interesting. So there's a bit of a melding here of the two.
Yeah, and so kind of the experience I hear, and that's awaking in me a little bit, is this: the fundamentalist background has this gratitude,
Yeah.
but it's kind of a gratitude that's confined, whereas it sounds
Yeah.
like what you describe is the gratitude is there, but it's also trust,
Yeah.
and the trust doesn't have to be like
Yeah.
tight.
It's kind of like a gratitude that is walking on ice back then. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
I'm so grateful that the ice hasn't broke, um, versus a gratitude like I have this, perfectly fitted, suit that will keep me warm always.
Mm-hmm.
There's a difference there. It's like, it's okay if I broke the ice is broken, I'm in the water, but I have the suit that still protects me.
And
Yeah.
how does that, because the way you describe it, it sounds really experiential. It doesn't sound like just an
Yeah.
idea. How
Yeah.
does that experience influence your day-to-day life?
Wow. Oh my God. It's indescribable. I would say because I can talk all day long to somebody about this, but just like you said, it has to be an experience that they have for themselves. And the experience, of course, is helped by reading certain things or by hearing about certain things. But I do have to give thanks to my fundamentalist background, because in those in those experiences, it's true. I couldn't have read these books that I read and that changed me. It was almost like these books gave a framework to the experience in the fundamentalist religion. I'll just tell you what the experience was. In the fundamentalist religion, there are two things, okay, that that gives people, why is fundamentalist religion still popular? It's still growing in some ways. It makes people so much like they want to spread the gospel, right? Why?
Mm-hmm.
I think there's two reasons in my experience. One is that the community of brotherhood. I just had Jehovah's Witness come to my door, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I could talk to them and try to dissuade them from their faith or whatever. But I'm like, no, I'm happy that they feel, guess what? The sense of brotherhood. There's no brotherhood like fundamentalist religion. I have not felt that outside of it. It is so profound. It's like we all believe in this very rigid, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and it's so like, you're my brother, like we are really in the same faith. The second experience is the worship experience, and it's different for every religion. A ceremony is different, ritual is different for every, but the ritual and the ceremony that I experienced was so profoundly grounding, embodied experience of this belief that it made it into my bones. The praise and worship, the music, it made it into my bones. The gratitude and the warmth made it into my bones. But the problem was that the belief was still so thinly rigid that it was easily breakable. And now I've added those experiences of that embodied warmth, and I've added the framework that says, yeah, I can. It both my mind and my emotions are aligned now, I guess. Because back then my mind kept questioning.
Mm-hmm.
So
And it sounds like this embodied, and I love the words you describe it with, like warmth,
yeah,
um, and this kind of suit. It sounds like a protection, and
yes,
it's like that seems to give you a level of rest and
yes.
security that really helps you.
Rest is the right word.
Hmm.
Yeah, it is an eternal restfulness that I don't know if a book can do it. It almost like you have to experience. Some people might experience it on a mountaintop. Some people might experience it in a warm bed. I mean, ironically, that they can connect that to that. But it's some embodied experience that has to be there for somebody. Maybe it's in love. Some people experience that in a romantic love, or it could be in a parental love.
I think there are many paths,
Different
and
ways.
the floor is yours now, in the
Okay.
sense of
Yes.
something that you would like to talk about that's at the edge of your thinking and that really moves in you, that you want to
Yes.
talk about and kind of have a listener.
Ah, okay. So, yeah, I guess I what's on the edge of my thinking, and it's been for a while, and I suspect it will be for a while longer, is entrepreneurship. I have this deep faith, I guess, that it can be for everybody. And yet I see a lot of people struggling with it. Like people who either they have a hard time organizing themselves to make it work, or it is always in some form of organizing ourselves to make entrepreneurship work. And I'm just so interested in whether how much of entrepreneurship is nature versus nurture. Like how much of successful entrepreneurship. So for example,
And would you say nature in the sense of DNA, or nature in the sense of upbringing, and nurture
that's
is what we
interesting.
can learn later?
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. I think it's a spectrum. I think it's all of it. I think that there's DNA involved, and then there's also formative experiences involved in that. So, for example, a lot of people don't know this, but I have a successful entrepreneur father. Okay, so my dad, growing up, all I knew was he was gone often. Unfortunately, that was part of it, because that's, back then there was not as much online stuff. And he built a company from the ground up, having been very poor from his upbringing. He literally a rags to riches story, where he built a company from ground up, zero to international success, where he had dozens of employees and making multi-million-dollar transactions in multiple countries around the world. And I would go into his company as a child and be the boss's kid, where I'm like, okay, my dad's the boss here. Like, look at all these dozens of people, Actually, he had hundreds of employees if you counted the factories where people were, but at his central headquarters, there were dozens that I saw. And to me, I was like, oh, so I think there was something formative there that I take for granted. It's like, well, anybody
that's
can.
normal.
That's normal that you just have a family member just, build up a business from nothing to a success. Most people don't have that. Okay. So
I don't have that.
Right. So I don't know about the DNA. I think part of my DNA is probably also that I have a certain way of thinking about organizing information. I mean, that's quite helpful. Spreadsheets come easily to me. They don't come easily to most of my clients, right? So that I'm sure that helps for business, right? So, okay. And then, but of course, my clients have their own formative experiences that I'm sure would be beneficial, right? So one example is that I think one example that is a detriment to my entrepreneurship is that, interesting, I think my race, because most of my the clients I work with are of a different race than me, right? And I think there is, and I would say it's funny. Like I noticed for years. I actually noticed something interesting. A lot of the clients who work closest with me, as I find out more about them, I learned that one of two things: either they had some kind of Asian influence in their life, even though they were white. They've lived in Japan, or they had a good friend who was Asian or something like that, or they had a spouse who was Asian, so that therefore my race was a welcoming influence for them, or the other reason was that they are an extremely liberal, socially liberal culture, or they have views where they are literally like almost, they have this almost, what do you call it? What do you call it when schools accept people of different races so that they can balance out what's that called? Affirmative action. Affirmative action. It's almost like certain clients, if they don't have the Asian influence, they have an affirmative action mindset where they're like purposely wanting to work with people, purposely wanting to support businesses of diverse racial backgrounds.
Can I Like I would like to understand your question one level
Yes.
deeper potentially.
Yes. Yes.
Because you asked yourself in the beginning that you have this faith that entrepreneurship is for everyone.
Yes. Yes.
Why? Like
Why?
why should it be for everyone? What's the
Yes.
why?
Yes. Yeah, no, and that's a really good, that's actually part of this, right? I think our society, social economic, I would just say economic engine is changing so fast, has been and will be for the next 5, 10, 20 years, that it's going to be increasingly hard to find a job that you find meaningful. So this is actually socioeconomic. Okay, there's two things happening here. One is that automation is basically replacing a lot of humans in rote work. You know, driving, factory work, call centers, administrative work, even lawyers and even software engineering, right? Like some of it's getting automated because software engineers are so smart, they can automate things. So humans are going to increasingly find it hard to find easily trainable work, in other words. Things that I can teach you. Listen, Lucas, step one, you do this, step two, you do the step. Well, if I can teach you that exactly, well, I can teach a robot how to do that too. Okay, so I think this is going to be a major problem for humanity going forward. Secondly, social media has made it so that we are easily influenced and envious of others who have a meaningful life in a way that we don't. Whether it's look at their relationship, they have such a perfect relationship, or look at their perfect vacation, or look at their perfect work. Look, they love their work. How come I don't love my work as much? Or perfect body. How come whatever it is, we are more and more enviable, or we have more and more envy of others who have the perfect life. And in other words, dissatisfaction is becoming more and more of a problem.
So this word meaningful seems to be really important for you.
Yeah.
What does it mean to have a meaningful work? What does that
Yes.
mean for you?
So meaningful work is work where the person, the human being, has more autonomy and ironically more uncertainty. Okay. Because if everything is certain, like I'm going to be doing these 10 steps for the rest of my life, I don't care how much autonomy I have over those 10 steps. This is going to be horrible. People need challenge. Ironically, we think we don't want challenge, but people actually thrive based on uncertainty and challenge and change. It's like, oh my God, there's a change. And now I got to use my ingenuity to figure out how to adapt to that change. And because of that process of adaptation, I'm happier because I was able to overcome that. Okay, so that's to me that's what entrepreneurship is. And that to me is the opposite of a corporate job where the boss in a corporation or in a business, a boss by definition wants their worker to be stable and to keep doing the same things. If I'm hiring you and I'm hiring you because I can't replace you with a robot yet, I need you to fill this role, to do this role. That's what I want you to do, what I want you to do. I don't want you to do what you want to do. I want you to do what I want you to do because that's what I'm paying you for. Okay. So if you do outside of this because you want more autonomy or you want more uncertainty, then it brings me uncertainty as a boss. And that's not good for my business because I want certainty in my business. Essentially, I want robots. I want really smart robots, but I want robots.
But isn't it that the more we can automate certain aspects, the aspects we can't automate actually include a lot of uncertainty, otherwise we could automate them?
That's true. So the uncertainty is where either the business owner needs to is what brings the business owner growth and autonomy and happiness, or they give that role to an employee, who then eventually outgrows it if they want more autonomy and uncertainty. So the business owner, therefore, is always in this state of, I'm either going to hire somebody. If I hire somebody, they could outgrow the role. They could leave me, right? And this is actually the reason why I am still a solopreneur today. Is that I know that there's this dynamic of, if I hire someone, there's a reason why I don't work with assistants anymore, because they tend to want to do more work than I think is necessary, and therefore, because that's the human, like, there's a sense of uncertainty. Well, I want to feel more of the role, so that I'm more, So,
do you have another word for uncertainty?
Novelty.
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 Mm-hmm.
That's what it is. That's what it is. So that's why I believe everyone eventually has to become an entrepreneur, because there's a need for three things. Now we're talking about, there's a need for autonomy, there's a need for novelty, and there's a need for security. And security is going to be increasingly difficult being under somebody else. Okay. In another, so that's why I'm trying to figure out, so here's the irony about all, right? I'm trying to help everybody become an entrepreneur. But if I give them the exact steps, they're no longer an entrepreneur. They're now, it's almost like they're now bought my franchise. It's like, now I'm a franchisor. It's like, okay, the George Kao method is a franchise. It's like, oh, you just do these 10 things and you will become successful. But that's the irony, is that it's no longer an authentic business if you're doing the exact things I'm telling you to do.
It sounds to me like this would be kind of the way I would try to summarize that, is, on the one hand, what you describe as novelty and challenge and all of those things, I could maybe summarize as freedom. And that is actually freedom. But to have freedom, for instance, in an entrepreneurial way, you need certain skills and certain processes. Otherwise, you can't reach this freedom, at least in the entrepreneurial way. So you need to learn these skills.
Yes.
But that means you don't have freedom in these skills, because if you don't do this, you don't reach that. So you're at a paradox.
It's a paradox. But the funny thing about it, of course, is that if somebody is trying to learn a certain set of skills and it's not working for them, they should be also simultaneously exploring on their own, almost creating skills or exploring other skills. Like, they need to have, like I can't have clients go, well, if I can't learn from George's ways, then I need to quit. You see what I mean? Like, George doesn't have all my answers. And like, so it's this kind of funny thing where it's like, I believe I have all the answers, because otherwise I wouldn't be talking about them. I believe in Facebook ads, but God, if it doesn't work for you, then God, you got to find a different way. I don't know. So it's kind of like this I don't know has to be, it can't be the final answer. I don't know, but I'm going to figure it out.
It also seems like that's the edge of your unknown, is that you have all of these processes and you believe in them, but you also know they're not for everyone.
They're not for everyone. And to be a successful entrepreneur means that people can't rely on any one teacher, skill set. They can't rely on that, because they have to know that even if that skill set gets automated or disappears or is no longer relevant in the market, they can figure it out. And that they can figure it out has to happen soon enough, because otherwise they have to get a job. So it's like this, it's very, very challenging. This kind of like, I'm trying to help everybody. It's like, I'm trying to help everybody learn a certain skill set in time for them to be able to succeed. And yet, if the skill set doesn't work for them, they have to figure it out in some other way quick enough to make it work.
So you're trying to teach a skill set and a meta skill set at the same time.
The meta skill set is experimentation.
And figure it out. And that was the time for you to talk about your leading edge of thought, by the way, but it was a beautiful ending, wasn't it? Right there.
Good. So now, you spend a lot of time doing these, you just, before we started recording, you were telling me about the 22 workshops that you were doing or 22 workshop days in 5 weeks. So I'm really curious, what are you actually doing in those workshops? Give me a sense of that first, because I want to see I want to have a picture in my mind, because that occupies your time a lot.
What am I actually doing, or what are we teaching?
No. What are you actually doing? I'm so curious. Like I want to get a picture in my mind of what Lucas is physically doing. I want to see a movie scene here.
So my main activities in these trainings, we're training relatively large groups of people, is number one, I present information. So it's about theories. For example, how does the human nervous system work? What is developmental trauma? How are these two connected? Stuff like that.
Yes.
That's one. Number two, designing and leading exercises for people to not just get information, but to learn tools to work with that. That would be activity 2 that Lucas does on these trainings. Activity number 3 would be then coaching people in those exercises. So they are working with each other, they are experimenting, and usually, like we just talked about with you, whenever you learn new skills, you usually don't succeed the very first time you try them. So then where are you stuck? Where can I give you a little nudge? Where can I maybe offer a slightly bigger frame than you are using? Stuff like that. And the last one is maybe the most important one and the least clear one, is I just talk to the people in the breaks, in the mornings, in the evenings. People come to me with their questions, their challenges, and we talk. And I generally only use the tools that we've taught until that point in the training. But in these conversations, I try to also, again, really listen to them, talk to them, but at the same time, help them with their personal exploration and journey using the tools we're teaching them.
I see.
So it's kind of the meta game.
Yeah. So of these activities, what's your favorite?
It's very difficult to rank because one without the other would feel hollow. But I think the one that gives me the most personal joy is talking to people.
Yeah, interesting. And when you're talking to people, what's one topic of conversation that comes up? It's
very often so we have these trainings and the days are pretty full. And usually, because what we're working with is in one-way consciousness work. Like doing body work, talking to people, you can only talk to people about things and in ways that you're conscious of. So we're often trying to introduce distinctions about internal states. We're trying to help people see where do their reactions maybe come from and why are they coming up now, and how can you, if that happens in a client, work with that. So very often people come with those personal experiences. They either share, this came up in me, or this came up in my practice partner, and I didn't know how to be with that. And then we explore that. So in many ways, it's usually exploring people's inner worlds and helping them become more aware of what are the patterns that are running in them, but also how can they be with that in a new way?
And do you feel like those conversations could happen over the internet, or is it really in person that's required?
In my experience, they can happen over the internet. They need a different setting over the internet. So a lot of the ways we work in these trainings is we do things both through conversation and touch.
Yeah. Right.
That's something we can't do over the internet. I am currently experimenting with like more movement exercises.
Yes.
And I find that they have similar yet also different ranges, but just sessions exploring each other can very much happen over the internet, I think.
Yeah, and what kind of, let me think about this. There are so many modalities, right, to help with trauma, with personal development. What makes this modality that you're doing workshops with, what makes it truly unique? Or what makes it something that you believe in more than another modality or other modalities you've seen?
That is a very difficult question, number one, because I don't know all the modalities. So I can't speak to all the modalities.
Yeah. Well, let's just say compared to others you've encountered that you already know about, what makes this one really special?
I think we're getting close to the realm of like almost paradoxical again. But for me, it has two things. It's on the one hand, it's subtlety. I think because we're talking about people's inner worlds and we're talking about different states of consciousness, and I am feeling something. I am angry, for instance. Okay, what does that mean? Is this, I am angry about something in my life right now? Is this anger from the past coming up? Is this more of a fight flight anger, or is this more of an emotional something's not right anger? And for me, these subtleties make a huge difference in how to be with other people and with myself. But I often don't, like many approaches I've known and I know often lack that subtlety on giving those distinctions that in the beginning are difficult to grasp. But I think once we get them, they profoundly change how we interact with ourselves and others. So there's subtlety on one end, and on the other end there is the holistic approach, because let's assume I have a lot of subtlety, but all I have subtlety about is the realm of emotions. Then I will look at everything through this lens of emotions, because that's what I know. But in my opinion, there are emotions and lots of different layers and subtleties of emotions, but there's also sensations and kind of body experiences. And I think they work differently. Our body works differently than our emotional body. So knowing how to kind of work with these different systems makes a difference for me. And so it's both. I think we need the subtlety in each system, within our emotional system, within our physical system, within our mental system. Is this just repetitive thought, or is this real thinking? And we need the breadth to know what are we dealing with right now.
So my next question here is, because you teach these things and you facilitate these things, I imagine people in your life probably expect you to be quite evolved or able to. And how do you? Does that give you pressure? Does that give you pressure? Are you glad about their perceptions about you? Like your closest relationships, for example, they know you do this kind of work. So do they then expect you to be like, well, you shouldn't be angry, Lucas, you know, you should know, or you should know how to deal with your anger. Like, how does that translate? I guess maybe the question is, how does that translate into your personal relationships?
Well, I think from what you asked, I have two kind of roads to answer.
Yeah.
How does it translate into my personal relationships? Since my partner is in a very similar line of work, I find that we have a relationship that I'm infinitely glad for, and that contains a lot of subtlety and depth that
Yes.
that I take for granted, but I don't think is
true
necessarily
for most.
normal.
Yeah.
And the other question you asked was, how do I find it that people perceive me like that? It very much depends on my daily mood. I do have one aspect or one part in me that likes to put myself slightly above people because I feel safe then. So that part generally enjoys it when people kind of look at me as, oh, he knows things I don't, because I can keep people at arm's length with that. But I also have another layer where it can be very draining, that when people kind of expect me to always be open to them.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things that I personally am most inquiring right now is the more my own subtlety and my own kind of perception of different psychological dynamics and things like that grows, the more difficult it becomes for me to just accept them, to just be like, oh, this is the way it is. And like, I can accept them for a moment, but to long-term be in friendships or in similar things where I have a sense that the friendship is tilted and I don't know how to find my way back, it becomes much more difficult for me to bear than it used to be when I was less aware of this kind of stuff.
Yes.
And I find that difficult.
Yeah, it is. What is one right now? What is your, is there, maybe that's that one, maybe it's something else. Is there an inquiry that you have going on right now that you're passionately, well, I guess maybe that's what you're going to talk about next, possibly.
We can also just do that transition. So please ask.
Yeah, let's transition, because that was going to be my next question that I didn't think was exactly what we're going to be doing here. Yeah. Well, no, the question is, what is a line of inquiry in your work that is particularly fascinating for you right now? That's what I'm curious about.
So it's quite interesting because I could take two routes right now. Just one inquiry that's personally very interesting for me, and one that's more professionally interesting for me. And which one interests you more? I would like to
personally.
Yeah. I've spent a lot of time these past months really diving into the dynamic of my own inner critic, and which I think is a massively important aspect also of being an entrepreneur. Like the self-consciousness, but also confidence, and on the other hand also reflection, and being able to take feedback and criticism without getting into what in this training we were talking about, we like to call the inner meat grinder, where it's like, rather than, oh, I get feedback and maybe it doesn't feel great the first second I get the feedback, it's like my internal my inner critic gets so active that I can't actually digest the feedback, because all I hear is I am shit, and I go down the drain. So this dynamic of the inner critic, and on the other side this feeling of self-worth, and self-worth not as a I am worthy because I am doing something, or I'm worthy because I am achieving something, but I have worth. I am worth.
Yes.
That level of for me, the experience I've had these past weeks is that something in my heart, the more I've explored this topic, seems to have filled in a way that whenever my critic is very active and I feel both angry at myself and usually very small at the same time, it's there is an emptiness and there is a sense of being lost and feeling lost. And it seems that this filling of the heart has really changed the way that dynamic is active in me. And it's still difficult for me to say a sentence like, oh, I am worth, or I am worthy, or
yes,
but it is something that's much more in an embodied sense present. So that's been a very important inquiry for me these past weeks and months.
Interesting. Huh.
And maybe because I'm now in the leading edge of my thought, I personally think, and I have no proof for this, but this is just my belief, that this inner critic, and I think the inner critic can come in very many shades, is actually one of the trickiest things to be with, especially in personal growth, because I personally know it, and I've seen it in so many clients that I have a session. In this session, something new happens, and I have a breakthrough, or something that was stuck melts. And at the end of the session, I can feel that that's there, but there's also this question in me of like, is this real? Can it really change? And then throughout the days, this gets louder and louder and louder, and this gets lost. And it's kind of that this inner critic takes over again. And yeah, one of the things I'm really thinking about, and I'm also just curious to maybe hear you, because you're my conversation partner, is how to work with this inner critic sustainably in people so that this doesn't repeatedly happen, because I see this as one of the main traps that I think people can stay stuck in for years. Yeah. And I imagine also in entrepreneurship, they can stay stuck in this for years.
Yeah. How do you currently, I'm curious, so in any given day when it comes up, what's your response to that when you notice the inner critic?
That would be step one. It's noticing it.
Yeah, right. Okay.
Because I think it's, for many of us, it's so natural to, for instance, for me personally, it's very much been this feeling in my back that's kind of like something's pressuring me from behind.
Oh, that's interesting.
But that feeling, and that's at least one of my critics, is so known to me and so natural for me that I often don't even recognize it as a critic, but just as oh, I have to do something. And so step one is actually identifying it as a critic rather than, oh, I need to do something, which is so much easier to just be like, oh yeah, I just have all of this energy, I need to do something, but I don't
talking about the subtlety. Yeah, the subtlety
exactly.
of the feeling of, okay, what's the distinction here? What's the
and for me, the big step beyond noticing it is actually then connecting with it. So not necessarily in the moment, but to take time to actually get to know that part. And this is where my kind of IFS background very much comes in, with this sense of each
internal
part,
family system.
yeah, each part has a reason why it's doing what it's doing.
Okay.
And the more I understand why it's doing that, the more I can see. So for instance, this part is really striving for me to be accepted.
So the part that you said, the back pushing you, why is that the inner critic? Why wouldn't that be the inner motivator? Is that, or is there such a thing?
I think there could be an inner motivator, but that would feel different than how it feels in my body. Because this and I think this is, again, if this is transformed, and that's really what I'm working on right now, the more I am transforming this, the more I feel this as a positive energy. But when I first became aware of it, it was pressure, and when I didn't follow that pressure, it was mostly my heart feeling empty, and there being this really child part of, so it's not necessarily about there is something in my back that's pushing, because that could also be stability or
there we go,
or holding or whatever, but it's about how it's happening, and that this how it's happening is, fuck you, you have to work, do more.
Right. Yeah. Hashtag hustle. Yeah.
I mean, talking about entrepreneurial culture.
Yeah.
It's better to hustle 24/7 than to have a job, where I'm like, really? Is that true?
Right.
But
yeah.
I think especially, and I think inner critics can come in many different shapes. So there can be the ones that really, and this is something I don't have as strong, but I know people who really have this, who attack your basic right to exist. You don't even have a right to exist.
No. Yeah.
Like,
wow. Yeah.
And that's a different taste than work more or you're worthless. But I think this work more is so widespread in different cultures. I think American culture has that very much. German culture has that, definitely.
Yeah.
And entrepreneurial culture has
that. Yes. And, I mean, Chinese culture, Japanese culture, Indian culture. I mean, yeah, it's all over the place. I mean, actually, if you look at the largest economies in the world, that's where so it's very interesting to me that, because I'm not as expert on the inner critic as you, obviously. Every time I've heard the inner critic, it's called one thing. And it's just one thing. So you're actually making distinctions here.
And these are not just distinctions from me. I am also borrowing them from Jay Early, like a dude I find brilliant for creating distinctions. But in my world, yes, there are very many different types of inner critics that can go from, it's more about the modus operandi. It's more about how they, what makes an inner critic for me is that it is a part of me that is criticizing myself.
Right.
And it can criticize me, and it usually does that to get me to do something. And that getting me to do something can be you're not worth it, so don't even try. So it tries to get me to like not do things and keep a low profile. And it can be, you're worthless, so work harder.
Right.
And it can be, you're worthless, you don't even have a right to exist. It's more about that.
So the key word there is worth.
I think in many cases, yes. I think it can also be to stay safe, you need to work harder. I think it can have different tastes, but it's about this level of that it attacks ourselves. So that one part of us attacks.
Yeah, it's kind of like an immune system gone haywire, kind of.
Yeah, it's trying to fulfill its job through this attack.
So is the inner critic ever beneficial?
Well, for the role it's trying to do, usually what it's doing works. If this part is, and this is one of my major distinctions would be, is it beneficial like, does it have a positive intent? Yes, always. Does it have positive results?
Yeah.
Very rarely.
Yeah.
I mean, it can be that you have a very, very strong inner critic, but because it's pushing you so strongly, you actually achieve in many ways.
Right.
But actually your achievement is not filled with joy, but is driven by fear.
Well, it reminds me of how many of us are raised. I mean, parents do this, schools do this, companies do this.
I do think that, at least for me, and also just looking at this culturally in the culture I've been brought up in, Germany, there is very much a level of like Protestant, you have to work to be
worthy.
Worthy, exactly.
Yeah.
So, but so can inner critics create results? Absolutely. I think, at least in my personal circle, some of the people who have achieved the most have done it through that inner pressure.
Yeah.
Is it the most sustainable, joyful, fulfilling experience of life? I'm not so sure.
What happens when there is so how does worth become grounded or become, a strong part of somebody's psyche then?
And that would be a big question. In my experience and in my view of the world, worth is not about my beliefs or my something, but worth is actually a part of who I really am, like a part of myself. I am worth. The question is, number one, do I experience that? And number two, as you put it so beautifully, which is something I use as a metaphor quite regularly, is it in my cells? And I think the true experience beyond the inner critic is often the experience of worth or safety or whatever it is that the critic is trying to create. But I think in a way that is not a belief, but that is actually an experienced reality of there is no question about my worth.
Yeah.
And that won't then be, I've experienced that once, but when we experience that again and again, I think then that critic can actually completely let go, because then the question of worth or achievement is not even a question anymore.
Right. Huh.
So
that's a great explanation. It's interesting. I feel like I feel the same way and I think the same thing, but you've talked about it in a different way than I've ever heard. So yeah,
it's what I'm right now trying to really put words to, and where I'm using other people's material, especially Jay Early, because I think he has a clarity that I rarely see, but where I'm really trying to put these experiences into easily digestible words, and also then kind of formats to work with people in this realm. So that's kind of my leading edge of my thought.
Excellent. Thank you.
You never know what's around the next corner. So.